The sound of laughter filled the park that afternoon, but 6-year-old Ethan Morgan hadn't spoken a word in over a year. Not since the accident. His mother, Alexandra, watched him from a nearby bench, her heart breaking as he played alone, trapped in his silent world. She couldn't have known that the stranger approaching the sandbox would change everything, that this chance encounter would not only break through her son's walls but would heal wounds she thought would never mend. If this story touches your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing moments that remind us how connection can transform lives when we least expect it. Alexandra Morgan checked her watch and sighed. 20 minutes. That's all she could spare today between the board meeting that had run late and the investor call scheduled for 4 p.m. 20 minutes to be a mother instead of a CEO. 20 minutes to try, once again, to reach her son. The playground at Westfield Park was moderately busy for a Wednesday afternoon. Children climbed, swung, and shouted with the carefree abandon that Ethan had once shown. Alexandra smoothed her pencil skirt as she sat on the bench, her designer heels sinking slightly into the mulch. Her assistant had raised an eyebrow when she'd mentioned this detour, but Alexandra had been firm. These moments with Ethan, however brief, were non-negotiable. "Go play, sweetheart," she encouraged, gently nudging Ethan toward the sandbox. He moved forward without resistance but also without enthusiasm, his small shoulders hunched beneath his blue t-shirt. His therapist had suggested routine exposure to other children might help, but after 6 months of these park visits, Alexandra was beginning to lose hope. She watched as Ethan methodically filled a bucket with sand, his movements precise and focused. No smile. No sounds. Just the mechanical actions of play without joy. The specialists had explained that trauma-induced selective mutism was complex, that recovery couldn't be rushed. But they hadn't lost their spouse and nearly lost their child in the same car accident. They didn't understand the weight of raising a child alone while running a Fortune 500 company. They didn't know what it was like to hear your child scream in nightmares but remain silent during the day. Alexandra's phone buzzed. An email from her CFO marked urgent. She hesitated, then opened it. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just to make sure it wasn't an emergency. 3 emails later, she looked up with a start. Ethan was still in the sandbox, but he wasn't alone. A man was kneeling beside him, demonstrating how to pack sand more firmly into the bucket. Alexandra tensed, her protective instincts flaring. She was about to rush over when she noticed something that stopped her in her tracks. Ethan was watching the man intently. Not with fear or discomfort, but with genuine interest. His body was turned toward the stranger, his usual rigid posture slightly relaxed. Alexandra remained frozen on the bench, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had momentarily captured her son's attention. The man was casually dressed in jeans and a faded green t-shirt. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and a short, neatly trimmed beard. Nothing remarkable about him, except for the gentle way he interacted with Ethan, not pushing for a response, simply demonstrating and then waiting. A little girl, perhaps 4 years old, with the same dark curls as the man, bounded over to join them. She plopped down in the sand and immediately began chattering away. Alexandra couldn't hear the words from her position, but she could see the animated expressions on the child's face. The man smiled at the girl with unmistakable affection, then returned his attention to Ethan, including him in the conversation as naturally as if Ethan had been responding all along. Alexandra's phone buzzed again. She silenced it without looking away from the scene unfolding before her. For 10 minutes, she watched as the man and his daughter built an elaborate sand castle with Ethan. Her son's movements became less mechanical, more engaged. At one point, the little girl handed Ethan a small plastic shovel, and he accepted it without hesitation, a simple interaction that brought tears to Alexandra's eyes. Ethan rarely engaged with other children. When the castle was complete, the man held up his hand for a high five. The little girl slapped his palm enthusiastically. Then, to Alexandra's astonishment, he held his hand up to Ethan. There was a moment of hesitation, a moment that stretched like an eternity, before Ethan slowly raised his hand and tapped the man's palm. Alexandra gasped. It was the most significant social interaction Ethan had initiated in over a year. The man looked up at the sound, meeting Alexandra's gaze. He smiled politely, then checked his watch. He said something to the children, and his daughter pouted dramatically before standing up and dusting sand from her overalls. The man extended a hand to help Ethan up as well, which Ethan accepted without resistance. Alexandra rose from the bench and approached them, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said when she reached the sandbox. "For including my son." The man shrugged. "No thanks needed. Mason here never met a sandbox he didn't like." He rested his hand lightly on Ethan's shoulder. "We made a pretty awesome castle, didn't we, buddy?" Ethan didn't respond verbally, but he looked up at the man with clear eyes, eyes that, for once, weren't clouded with sadness or distance. "I'm Daniel," the man said, extending his hand to Alexandra. "And this is my daughter, Lily. I'm 5 3/4. Lily announced, holding up 5 fingers and then struggling to figure out how to show 3/4. Alexandra smiled despite herself. "I'm Alexandra. And this is Ethan. He's 6. 6 is a good age," Daniel said, addressing Ethan directly. "You're probably in 1st grade, right? Lily here is in kindergarten, but she thinks she knows everything already." "I do know everything," Lily protested, making Daniel laugh. Alexandra noticed that Daniel spoke to Ethan normally, not with the exaggerated enthusiasm or careful hesitation that most adults adopted when they realized Ethan wouldn't respond. He treated Ethan like any other child, and somehow, that simple respect seemed to be reaching her son in a way nothing else had. "We come here most Wednesdays around this time," Daniel mentioned casually. "Lily loves the sandbox, but she's always looking for new architects to help with her castles." Alexandra recognized the invitation in his words. We try to come on Wednesdays too. When my schedule allows." She felt a sudden need to explain herself. "I'm usually not in heels at the playground. Work day." Daniel nodded without judgment. "Life happens. We do what we can." Alexandra's phone buzzed again. Her investor call would start in 10 minutes, and she still needed to get back to the office. "We have to go," she said reluctantly. "But maybe we'll see you next Wednesday." "We'll be here," Daniel replied. He turned to Ethan. "Hope to see you next week, Ethan. We could use your engineering skills again." As they walked away, Alexandra was struck by the strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. Hope, for the first time in months. Curiosity about this man who had somehow connected with her unreachable son. And guilt, sharp, painful guilt, that a stranger had managed in minutes what she hadn't accomplished in a year. "Did you have fun?" she asked Ethan as she helped him into the back seat of her BMW. Ethan didn't answer, but he looked at her directly, his eyes clearer and more present than they had been in months. It wasn't a word, but it was communication. It was something. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Alexandra sat in her home office staring at her laptop screen without really seeing it. The investor call had gone well, it always did. Alexandra Morgan hadn't become the youngest female CEO in her industry by faltering under pressure. But tonight, her usual sense of accomplishment was absent. Instead, her mind kept returning to the image of Ethan giving that high five. Such a small gesture for most children. Such an enormous breakthrough for her son. And then there was Daniel. There had been no wedding ring on his finger, and he'd referred only to himself and Lily, suggesting he might be raising her alone. Alexandra found herself wondering about his story. What had brought him to that sandbox on a Wednesday afternoon? How had he known exactly how to interact with Ethan? She shook her head, trying to dispel these thoughts. She didn't have time for distractions. Between the company and Ethan's needs, her life was already overflowing. The last thing she needed was to develop some schoolgirl crush on a stranger in the park. Still, when Wednesday approached the following week, Alexandra found herself rearranging meetings and delegating tasks to ensure she could leave the office by 3 p.m. "It's for Ethan," she told herself firmly. "He responded positively last time. It's important to maintain that connection." The weather was perfect that Wednesday, sunny with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of newly cut grass and blooming flowers. Alexandra had dressed more casually this time in slacks and a blouse, with comfortable flats instead of heels. She felt strangely nervous as she and Ethan approached the playground. Daniel and Lily were already at the sandbox. Lily spotted them first and waved enthusiastically. "Ethan! We saved you a spot. We're building a castle with a moat today." Daniel looked up and smiled, raising a hand in greeting. Alexandra returned the gesture, trying to ignore the unexpected flutter in her stomach. This was about Ethan, she reminded herself. Nothing more. But as the weeks passed and their Wednesday park meetings became a regular occurrence, Alexandra found it increasingly difficult to maintain that perspective. Daniel was easy to talk to, funny without trying too hard, and remarkably insightful. Most importantly, Ethan continued to respond to him, with small but significant breakthroughs each time. By the third Wednesday, Ethan was nodding or shaking his head in response to Daniel's questions. By the fifth, he was sitting closer to Lily, occasionally handing her toys without prompting. On the seventh Wednesday, when Lily fell and scraped her knee, Ethan brought her his own special blue shovel, his favorite, to distract her from the pain. Alexandra learned that Daniel was an architectural engineer who worked primarily from home to accommodate Lily's schedule. His wife had left when Lily was an infant, unable to handle the responsibilities of parenthood. "Some people aren't meant to be parents," he'd said without bitterness. "I'm just grateful she recognized it early instead of staying and making all of us miserable." In turn, Alexandra had shared the basics of her own story, her rapid rise through the corporate ranks, her marriage to James, and eventually, haltingly, the accident that had taken her husband and left Ethan physically recovered but emotionally shattered. "He was in the car?" Daniel had asked quietly, watching Ethan and Lily build a sand mountain. Alexandra nodded. "In the back seat. The other driver ran a red light, hit us on James's side. The doctor said Ethan was lucky, just a concussion and some cuts. But he saw." Her voice faltered. "He hasn't spoken since he woke up in the hospital." Daniel had reached over and briefly squeezed her hand. Just that, a simple human connection, but it had nearly undone her. How long had it been since someone had offered her comfort rather than the other way around? "Thanks. Listen, I know this is last minute, but Lily's been asking for Ethan. She's worried he'll think she abandoned their sand kingdom." There was a smile in Daniel's voice despite the concern. "Any chance you two could stop by? Just for a few minutes? We're at the Blue House on Maple Street, number 47. Alexandra hesitated. This would cross a line from casual park acquaintances to something more intentional. But when she looked down at Ethan, she saw that he was listening intently to her side of the conversation, his eyes questioning. "We'll be there in 15 minutes, she heard herself say. Daniel's house was a modest two-story with a well-maintained garden and a porch swing. Nothing like Alexandra's sleek, modern penthouse apartment. This was unmistakably a home, lived in and loved. Lily was on the couch in the living room, surrounded by stuffed animals and looking pale but perking up considerably when she saw Ethan. "You came. Daddy said you might. I told Mr. Bear you would come visit me because we're friends." Friends. The word hung in the air. Alexandra glanced at Ethan, wondering if he would retreat from this direct social label. But Ethan moved toward the couch without hesitation, sitting carefully on the edge near Lily's feet. "I made tea," Daniel said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Real tea for us, pretend tea for the kids." Lily insists that tea makes everything better. Smart girl, Alexandra replied, following him. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with children's artwork magnetized to the refrigerator and a row of herbs growing in pots along the windowsill. Daniel poured tea into mismatched mugs and handed one to Alexandra. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Lily really has gotten attached to your Wednesday visits." "Ethan too," Alexandra admitted. "He actually got ready early today. Put his shoes on by himself, which is significant." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their tea and watching the children through the doorway. Lily was showing Ethan her collection of stuffed animals, introducing each one with elaborate backstories. Ethan was listening attentively, occasionally reaching out to touch one of the toys when invited. "He's different with her," Alexandra said softly. "More present. More himself." Daniel nodded. "Kids can reach each other in ways adults can't sometimes. Lily doesn't expect him to talk, so there's no pressure. She just accepts him as he is." "You do that too," Alexandra said, meeting his eyes. "Accept him as he is." Most adults get uncomfortable with his silence, try too hard to get a response. Daniel shrugged. "Everyone communicates in their own way. Ethan communicates plenty if you're paying attention." The simple truth of this observation hit Alexandra like a physical blow. Had she been so focused on getting Ethan to speak that she'd missed all the ways he was already communicating with her? Before she could pursue this thought, a small sound from the living room caught their attention. Lily had apparently asked Ethan a question, because he was nodding his head. Then, so quietly they almost missed it, came a whispered, "Yes." Alexandra's mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Tea splashed across her slacks, but she barely noticed. She was staring at her son, who had just spoken his first word in over a year. Daniel reacted first, calmly grabbing a dish towel and kneeling to clean up the broken ceramic. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Just breathe." Alexandra realized she had indeed stopped breathing. She inhaled shakily, tears filling her eyes. In the living room, Ethan and Lily continued their conversation as if nothing momentous had occurred, Lily chattering away, Ethan mostly listening but occasionally responding with a nod or, miraculously, another whispered word.